Hello, and welcome once again to Starfinder Wednesday. I am developer Jason Keeley, and you can't get rid of me. With me today is...
I am Ron Lundeen. I'm a developer here as well. I'm on the Pathfinder side for my development. So there's an entire cube wall between us. So.
At least one other person, probably two, between you and me. But Ron, you're no stranger to Starfinder. You have written several Starfinder adventures, including the one we're going to talk about today, The God Host Ascends. That's Attack of the Swarm, number 6, the final volume in this sort of epic war story. We're going to sort of give you some insider information, some developer chat on what went on within the writing process and with the developing process with me. But be warned, there's going to be some spoilers. For this.
Lots of spoilers.
We're not going to give into every exacting detail of the adventure, but we're going to talk about a lot of stuff that if you're playing in this adventure, it will definitely be a spoiler. Yeah. So, just plug your ears up for the next 45 minutes, I guess. Once we, go through this, that's when we'll take your questions. So, unless you have something super pressing you want to hear, save it for a little bit further on to the end there. We'll be paying attention to the chat as much as we can, but we also like to talk a lot, and it's for me it's hard to talk and read at the same time.
That's right. Yeah, neither of us shut up much, so
yes, indeed. So Ron, hi, how's it going?
It's going very great. I'm excited to be here on Starfinder Wednesday.
The thing about Ron is his excitement is infectious, and I was talking to Ron. He's always excited about something, and it kind of rubs off. I don't know. So I'm excited to be here too. So let's stay talking, right? Attack of the Swarm number 6. To sort of recap what's been going on, your PCs have been battling the devouring swarm on their home system, being sort of pushed off their home planet of Suskalon, and then being forced to sort of go on this system-spanning journey and mind-enhancing journey through other planets that have been taken over by the swarm, comets that hold religious reliquaries, and then into the mind of the swarm itself. You have, by this point, they have won a decisive victory against the psychic aspect of the swarm. And here in this particular volume, they get to take their home planet back. And there was a fun thing I definitely wanted to hit on. I wanted this to be, while I wanted the beginning to be sort of desperate and depressing, you kind of lose at the end of Fate of the Fifth, but you get to come around and feel like big darn heroes and take the planet back. So I said, hey, let's get Ron to write it.
Sweet. It was nothing but good for me, right? Because we put these things together, there's like a 80, 100 page outline that goes into one of these. So anybody that's writing an adventure, we know the whole story. I knew the whole story, and I knew that it started really sad, frankly. But my piece of it was, I get to be like the dramatic conclusion to take this is the fight to take things back.
The fight to take things back. But it's not all going to be candy and roses for the PCs. At the beginning, what I wanted to, so they've come back to near their home system. The Suskalon Defense Force has called them back, and it says, okay, you've delivered this blow against the swarm, and they're kind of reeling there because their psychic connection is all interfered with, that they're in disarray, and now the SDF can strike back. And throughout this, the PCs have been kind of special operatives being sent on these little missions here and there. They start off as sort of like grunts down in the trenches, but they've been sort of promoted here and there to become this sort of task force, working directly for Commander Najiri, who's been the sort of point of contact mostly throughout. And this one, Commander Najiri says, "Come meet my boss." A few of the bosses, the sort of head of the SDF, and you get to interact with them and talk about the challenges of what that. What's going on in that first part of the adventure, and how you sort of approach that particular way to do it.
This is exciting. It was the first. I think it's the shortest part 1 of any adventure I've ever done, because it's one sort of long decision point, and that's it. But what I wanted to do is give the desperate sense that there just isn't enough people or material to get the job done.
Right.
And so the way that I wanted to set it out, and I actually had to go back and forth with the numbers quite a bit. I'm like, all right, so the way the PCs are presented is like, we want to retake our home planet. There's a lot that we have to do. Here's like these 9 things that we have to do, and we just don't have enough people we have just barely enough people to try them all.
Right.
But we don't have enough people to decisively succeed at all of them. Right. Help us take the extra people and decide where they're going to go.
Yeah.
And that's got a real consequence for the rest of the adventure, because where you've decided to allocate people, starting from the very beginning, hey, we're going to need escort down to the planet. How tough that fight is, the starship battle is when you go down to the planet, depends on, did we commit some of our resources there?
Right. Yeah.
And if we made that one kind of easy, then you just didn't have enough people for some of the later ones, and then some later parts of the adventure are hard. So what I really wanted to do is take the PCs from sort of grunts who are taking orders to special operatives, like you say, and doing this fabulous mindscape work that they do, to come back and say, okay, here's the burden of leadership. Yeah. Right. The burden of leadership is that you have to make decisions about where you're going to commit troops. And in order to twist the knife just a little bit, I made sure that in each of those, it was clear, and the PCs are going to know, hey, any units committed to task X are, they might make it out. Anyone to task Y, they're probably going to die. Yeah. Task Z is considered a suicide mission. Yeah. Anybody, any of the soldiers will go if you tell them to, because of sort of their pride and wanting to get the job done and to save their planet, their family, and friends. But you're sending these people to certain death to get something done. And that is the fact that that's sort of the part of the decision point that the players make is what gives it sort of the weight. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the sort of mentioned that those generals and whatnot are like, okay, PCs, you have the most experience with the swarm by this point, right? You know how to fight them out, so that's why we need your help to figure out, hey, did we take, we're taking point A, we're taking point B, are we, committing more troops to point C, the final battle, for instance, are we going to just funnel everything to that, which is, again, the sort of virtual suicide mission to take out the last of the swarm on the planet. And again, so you meet a couple of the generals and you make these particular decisions, which are going to come into play later on, but then the action has to begin. Yes. Right. And the action begins in force, right? So you're sort of given, you sort of either have the ship that the PCs have been flying here, and the PCs may have been changing ships here and there depending on the nature of the mission and if they wanted to or not. But if they don't have a ship or don't want to use the ship that they've been using, they get a nice big carrier style ship, and sort of given leadership roles and commands of dozens of other sort of officers aboard that, and are sort of meant to sort of, hey, now escort this particular, well, you get in close, everyone's landing, there's ships everywhere, right? And you're going to land, but then something happens, the swarm starship started attacking this other one that lost its defensive perimeter, essentially, and you've got to fight them off. And those are some neat new swarm starships, because they have big old pincers on them. That's right. They're basically big starship-sized beetles that come up and just kind of chew. And they just chew on it. So there's sort of fun, sort of that way. You're basically trying to like run interference against this other ship, while two of them are like, maybe one is attacking you while the other one is trying to just sort of chomp on this support carrier. And there comes not only are there consequences for where you decide to do things, but in this second part where you're doing various missions on the plane of the surface, there are consequences to failure of those missions. Right. So if you fail at this starship combat, something happens that maybe even sort of negates your earlier decision to send troops to point C, because now they're needed back here, point A, to shore up your mistakes, which has sort of cascading consequences. So there's a neat little puzzle mechanism kind of going on here, that was sort of fun to keep track of and make sure that everything has a consequence. Right, and I wanted to make sure that there were consequences that matter. There was a built into the adventure sort of a numerical reason, right? If you devote one extra unit rather than 3 extra units, then you're 1/3 you only get 1/3 of the benefit that you would, right? So it actually, but it matters. So nobody. So the PCs experiencing it might realize, the most they might realize is, that seemed kind of easy. Oh yeah, remember we committed a lot of troops to that, right? They're not going to know that it was incrementally easier based, but the GM knows all that. Yeah, exactly. So. And there's no right answer to this puzzle, right? Exactly. There's no one way to do this to make everything easy, right? And all of it's going to depend on the PCs as a group. If they are more about, we're definitely rah getting in there, they might not worry about, we'll take this, point B all by ourselves, right? So we can do that. I did actually, when I was looking at the way they could allocate stuff, I made sure to think of myself what was going to happen if they took the kindly option, right? If given all these, if the PCs are like, okay, we will send no additional units to the places that are certain death, right?
Right.
Where do we put, because we want to think about the soldiers. There's some people who'd be like, I'm not going to throw soldiers into a meat grinder when I can do it myself.
Yeah.
And so I had to make sure that everything sort of still played out both sort of winnably, I guess, and fun for the rest of it, even if you've got people at the beginning who are like, I'm going to send anybody on a suicide mission if I can help it.
So then part 2 happens, and there are things go slightly wrong here and there, and the PCs are basically, it's again called to be special operatives. The commander and the generals or whatnot. It's like, all right, we're going to send you to these places. Here's what's going wrong here. Here's what's going here. And part 2 is almost a little sandboxy. There's sort of there's like 5 things that need to get done, and you can kind of do them in any order as your players want to. With a note that if you fail at space A might cause a flood in space B, right?
That's right.
In fact, one of them is basically, hey,
Literally
there's a problem at the
flood.
dam, and if you mess things up there, the dam gets at least a tiny bit destroyed to the point where the basement of this area C is flooded. Right, and makes it harder for you to get around and whatnot. I believe the outline was mostly just sort of, hey, figure out some fun stuff to do on the planet, right? So what would you consider was your what are you most proud of in part 2?
Oh, I can answer that question generally and then specifically.
Yeah.
Generally, I think that you can create some paralysis at the table if you're like, okay, your heroes are in this situation, go do these 7 things, right? What are we gonna do? The way I structured this was, okay, you've landed, now do these couple of things, these 3 things or whatever. While you're doing that, people are calling in and say, we got this problem. We got this other thing. Like you check your voicemail and you're like, oh, got all these other things, right, that are going on. So it doesn't seem like you've got sort of carte blanche to approach all these things. It almost seems like you've got a job to do, but here's all these other distractions, which are just as important, maybe even more important with your thing.
Exactly.
So the way that I presented that intentionally to keep the players from being overwhelmed, but still provide a ton of options was neat. Specifically, the one of these that I'm most proud of is there's a nuclear reactor that's had a reactor leak. And I did my best to go full on horror movie with that one, right?
That's true. So, that one gets spooky.
That's right. And it's that what you're doing is like with a lot of good horror movies, right? You're following along people who have had some successes already and seeing that they failed.
Yes, that's true, right? So, the people the units that you end up committing to protect the reactor post, spoiler, they don't make it.
None of them.
But you do get to witness what happens to them through their video, chats and whatnot.
That was a little bit.
It was a little bit, but if you do commit more of them, the PCs end up with more information.
More of they all die, but they survive long enough to get you more information.
So you know what you're up against when you have to end up being the one who fights it, because you do. The PCs will have to be the one who saved the day in that sense.
I do want to say that there's one of the scenes is at a dam, and this was inspired. If I can diverge into a quick story,
sure.
So I live near a big dam, the Tolt River Dam, which gives the Seattle area like 30% of its drinking water. And I wanted to go see it. I've seen pictures of it. I'm like, oh, let's go see the dam. And I couldn't figure out the roads that get up to the dam. And so my dad came in from out of town. I'm like, oh, hey, let's give it another try. Let's go see the dam. We're on these old logging roads and stuff like, we just can't get up to this dam. And only then do I go home and do some research and find out that after 9/11, a lot of sort of public works areas were sort of shut down, and they actually had closed. They diverted several of the roads because they don't want people up there. So I thought, well, I've been foiled in my attempt to see an actual interesting dam, but I've been spending all this time looking at pictures and reaching dams. Oh. I'm going to put one into this adventure.
That's good. Right?
It's going to be an important plot point going through the dam.
And basically there's a sort of like, oh, it's power. We need to help with get the power back running on. And there's some swarm just rise up out of the lake and
it's all the acidified goopy lake.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's right. Because the swarm have been sort of doing their thing, and what they've been doing is poisoning the lake. I think that one of my favorite bits of this part that you wrote was it was unusually set in an estate. So this the fancy part of
Matchmaker
town.
House.
The Matchmaker House. This fancy part of town where people go to stay in this house and then just sort of like get matched up with other people who are also staying at the house.
That's right.
So it's
that's
like
right.
these rich people, and then it is sort of taken over by some rogue mercenaries that are hired by an evil corporation to sort of study the swarm. And this is kind of got a little bit of that Aliens vibe, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that the evil corporation wants to get this capture a swarm to turn it into the ultimate weapon, right?
What is the Wayland Yutani, whatever that
Wayland Yutani,
corporation.
exactly.
Yeah,
So it's got a little bit of that vibe to it, but also it's set in a fancy house that smells of cinnamon.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So, and then, but also the grunts are there and they've taken over, and there's a couple of the people you got to take care of, and then once you've sort of taking care of that business to figure out what's going on, that the swarm that they have captured escapes, and it's the size of a bus itself already.
That's right.
So you've got to hop back in your Jeep and chase after it. So it becomes a whole chase sequence, and there's a possibility that if you fail that chase sequence, that later on that final encounter gets tougher with the with the final thing. The one thing there was a couple of interesting bits, and I want to sort of talk to you a little bit about, like, if you mind, talk about development and why things change and things that have changed. So there's this new swarm that you've created, this sort of bus-sized psychic swarm that basically sort of is a amplifier.
Big old psychobox.
Yeah.
Show a picture. While you're talking, I'll show a picture.
That ends up being sort of like important. That's the one thing that the mercenaries have captured. You find that they've also I guess one thing I sort of take a step back. Where you land and the city that you're doing most of these missions of is the city of Brinoa, which is a major plot point in the first volume of the AP, where the PCs never get into the city itself, but they watch it fall. So this is another moment. This is a very specific moment where the PCs are coming back to a place that they've been before, sort of, or they've seen and have a personal interest in maybe sort of taking it back, right? It's the sort of essentially it's the planet's capital in a lot of ways, and it becomes that's why it's so important to sort of take it back, and while all these other weird things are happening. But anyway, what happens is the swarm end up taking a stadium.
People are saying they want to see it a little better than I did. All right, there you go. There is your giant bug.
It's a big one. But it's not the biggest bug in the adventure. We'll get to that in a minute.
Ooh.
It's also so you had them sort of this area was sort of become a breeding ground for these cycle boxes. We got to blow up the stadium now. This becomes a matter of, like, you're not just taking things back. Now you've got to actually, like, destroy some enemy fortifications, essentially, right? And so it becomes a matter of getting inside and knowing where to set the charges, while outside the units that you committed to the stadium are fighting back the swarm advance. Or I guess
because their demolitionists have all been killed. Like,
right,
at the very first, like, we need you to do it. Our demolitionists are dead.
Sorry, yeah. And I think what happened in the way you had written it up was that in there, once you start setting the charges, something, some of these big bus bugs come in and attack you. And I thought, well, we had the kind of the chase then you have to fight it, and we're going to see them probably later on in the adventure. So I wanted to mix it up a little bit. And we had already talked about, at least in the first or second volume, about swarm physiology, that they have these things called programmer drones. And you can see here a cloud of them. They're basically like mosquito-sized, maybe a little bigger than a mosquito-sized, DNA injectors, and that's how the swarm sort of get to program all their weird different variations. So I thought, well, let's bring that. Like, you don't really see them because they're not really a threat. They wouldn't really be a threat during an invasion when they're attacking Brinoa and Susklan. They wouldn't be on the planet anymore, and Ilam Chuva after they've already attacked it. They wouldn't be in. They may have been in the Mindscape, but at this point, I hadn't thought of it. And so I brought them back here, but they needed to be CR11, right? Now, one of those being CR11 would kind of make no sense,
right?
So I just said, oh, well, they'll just be a massive,
just a whole bunch of them,
a massive of them. So I had to think of another word other than swarm, so I couldn't call this a swarm programmer swarm.
Right.
So it's got swarm programmer cloud, since they are mosquitoes in a way. So you have to sort of get bit a bunch by them and whatnot. So that's the sort of thing. This particular piece of art is by Mark Molnar and the folks at Pixeloid, always doing great art for us here in Starfinder. But yeah.
Well, this is a good thing that I really liked going through sort of the final version.
Sure,
is all the different ties that you've made to things that went on earlier that I didn't know about. One of the examples is there's an NPC right at the very beginning, Xantos.
Xantos Lochwort, the worst person.
So in the adventure, I just had some sort of NPC that I just made up. Be the one to, like, call the PCs and go, hey, we've got this trouble and what's going on, and then static, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so you made it that guy. I'm like, well, that's gonna be so satisfying for somebody that's in it, right?
Hopefully. I mean, he tries to mutiny against the PCs in Volume 2 at the beginning of Volume 2. They pick him up, they kind of help rescue him, and he's kind of a Dr. Smith kind of character, is like, complaining, you people are the worst, what's happening? And he's a scientist himself. He's actually involved with the evil company that tries to, evil science company that's trying to capture the swarm. So that's why I wanted to tie that back in, and maybe have him be rescued, or not get, like, there was a sort of like does it become more, there's a little bit of leeway here for the GM. Do you want it be have him get found out by the mercenaries and shot, and then they find his body, and does that become a satisfying thing? Finally, this guy's dead.
He got his comeuppance.
Or do you rescue him? He's locked himself in a wardrobe and is cowering like the coward he is, right? And you rescue him, and we pulled your ass out of the fire again, right?
Right.
And then, but also I had to put in a sidebar, and it says, if your players put him in an airlock in Volume 2 and spaced him because he was so dang annoying,
odious,
yeah, this is then somebody else.
Well, and then somebody else was the person that I initially put in there, right?
Yeah,
so I was glad to provide you a backup there. Throughout, there's an awful lot of critters that were in some of the earlier volumes that come back, and that's pretty satisfying. That's often hard to do because you can't assume that anybody necessarily owns that volume, so you do some stat reprinting in order to make sure. But that also gives you the opportunity as a developer, right? So it can take them and maybe make them a little better than they were, because they've got to be higher level.
Right, the CR3, Swarm Core Box is not going to be a threat to these, these level 11 players, right? So I basically said, by now the Swarm has been on this planet long enough, and they've beefed up some. And this is sort of to represent how the Swarm do that kind of thing. Yeah. So they beef themselves up. You see some beefed up versions of some old Swarm enemies, which is pretty fun and cool. Some ones that we had in previous volumes, but didn't actually get to fight for whatever reason. They just didn't fit, but we had new ones. That's the Nowphage. Nauphage, maybe, because it's kind of comes from Nautilus or Nautilic. Those are the ones that sort of come up out of the acid lake, right? So just throw them off. And again, more troops, because we introduced that in this particular AP. But once you've sort of gone and done, these few missions, it eventually, and success or failure, but mostly success, I would imagine, and at least on the part of the rest of the SDF, if not on the PCs, eventually you get to the point where you get to take back the planet, and by doing so, finish off the big boss swarm creature, which the AP has been hinting at since the first volume. You've sort of saw it at a distance, and you've heard about this name, the God Host. Find out what the swarm's plans are. They're attempting to sort of get a sliver of divinity to become sort of like demigods themselves, and for plot reasons, Suscalon has this sort of spot on it that is kind of filled with this rock that kind of has some divinic power, some sort of sacredness. And while their first plan was to get the Crown of Hylax, which the PCs ended up getting and using to sort of defeat their psychic link, that crown was made of that stuff from this planet, and there is a temple built on that particular spot.
From the beginning.
From the very beginning, right, exactly. It's Laurie 7x3, it's not a starstone. It was there in the planet to begin with. And right, so this is again this is where we're coming back to a place where we have actually visited. In Volume 1, the PCs visit this temple to Hylax, where they rescue a priest who sort of becomes a sort of a recurring NPC throughout. But that's where they find out that the God Host has sort of taken up residence, and is trying to maybe mine this stuff, and
in the worst possible place for the God Host to be taking up residence, right? Because that's where the stone is.
Well, it's just attracted there, and it's trying to dig it out, and it's trying to salvage its plan, because its plan has essentially failed at this point. It can't get the Crown of Hylax. It's trying to maybe make a new one or do something like that, but because we still need that dramatic tension, there's a chance that it could happen if the PCs don't do anything, right? So they make their way up. They have a sort of a get back up into that part, and it's a distance away. Like, they're going to feel so much. So in the first volume, there's this long slog from the Brinoa area to this river that is south of the temple, and then eventually, that they get a car and can drive up to the temple because it's up in the mountains. They're going to feel so much better when they get to go we need to go to the temple again. Boop, and just
Now
get to
you're
go
there.
there, right? Yeah, like we don't have to walk anymore. Hooray!
Although even that is characteristic with a lot of like war type movies, right?
Yeah.
Where so we fought for every inch of this ground and bled for it. Okay, now that we've got it, okay, take a Jeep back, right?
Yeah,
That's
in a way, yeah, exactly. And so this becomes a what we like to do every once in a while here is to look at how maps change.
Okay.
A map given to us by Ron Lundeen. We can see his map sketch here, and here's the temple. As you can see, well, we could tell. You'll be able to tell later that it's got sort of a big space for the big baddie, which we'll talk about at the end of this because that's that's a whole other thing. And we can move on to take a look at what the piece of art was from the original Fate of the Fifth map for the Temple of Hylax, and this is of course by our good friend Damian Mamelidi.
And this is one of the advantages of having me sort of right here is that this was still sort of in sort of some sketch stages and whatever. I'm like, I want to see what it's going to look like because we're going back to the exact same spot. I want to be looking like the exact same thing.
Now, what happened with this? I think probably by the time you did the sketch and through the development. Also, it's just sort of developer tip, by the way, for my purposes. If you're going to put something twice, maybe don't put it on a diagonal, because that became the way that I had to like turn it and think about what north was and different squared footage. Something about your particular sketch was a little off in terms of the scale. In terms of like, so you can see like the space of the in between those two pincers. At the front,
I see what you mean. Yep.
There's like 10. There's like 6 squares between it. Where as in the final version, it was only like 3 or 4. So I tweaked it a bit, and for other reasons, I wanted to have you can sort of see that what's in the back there sort of could be a direct shot, and oftentimes there were some clues that we needed to give, which we'll talk about the God Host fight later. And I wanted to make sure that the PCs got. So what I did, and we'll get to the final version of this map now, also by our good friend Damian Mamelidi, which was to sort of offset the big. By the way, this is kind of like a big ambery, cocoony,
resinous
kind of grossness, yeah. And offset that a little bit, and then kind of create a little winding path that leads to the final chamber. And that way, hopefully, the PCs will find the clues that they need to basically help them in the fight that's to come.
Even better. This is one of the. I mean, I went through this adventure sort of, when the final product, fairly closely, fairly specifically, and I think the thing that I'm most kicking myself for not including that you added was like the dying dead recording, the exposition part of it.
Yeah, there's a sort of a necessary bit of exposition that the PCs kind of need for this final fight, which will sort of explain why. But basically, there's a sort of a forward base that the PCs go to, and they meet someone who's like, oh yeah, we sent a scout out there and he's never returned. So if you find him, at least find his ident and bring him back so we can get closure. And then you find his stuff, and he's got a thing that's saying, oh my God, this thing is huge and it's got multiple heads and stuff, and oh my God, so just to sort of give the PCs a clear, because they've only seen the God Hosts from a distance,
from a long distance. They don't know anything about having fight it or what.
Yeah, they only heard rumors about it from other entities in the in the past. So I wanted to make sure that they would understand what's going to happen, which we'll get to the stat block. We're going to talk about the stat block for this final thing. Before we move on. So, and because this was also essentially also by Damian Mamelidi, he probably most likely took the exact same thing he drew and just kind of tweaked it and then added some stuff. But what's also cool about this difference is that you can see that time has passed. When in Fate of the Fifth, it's winter, and now it's not so much. Probably weeks, months later, the snow has melted. You can see that sort of fun really red ground beneath it. So let's first of all eventually you get to, there's some other fights, obviously, to get to before you get to the boss. There's some swarm creatures that are acting as kind of like high priests, trying to channel this divine energy, try to reclaim or try to claim it. But eventually you're going to get yourself to the big bad, who's on the front cover here, which you can see here. But let's get a closer look at the God Host.
Yay!
Oh boy, I had a lot of fun just sort of thinking like, let's do something different. Swarm's kind of going to be insectile, and I want to think what's going to be big. And I don't know, God Host could just be like, it's just a big humanoid swarm, dude. I wanted to do something crazy and weird, so we made it a Hydra. And indeed, Lori said my theory, it is a Hydra cleric. It's got little halos. I told the artist, Satayawan Farika, who did all our great covers for Attack of the Swarm, put a little chasuble on him.
Yeah.
And so, and it came out so good. Oh, I'm so happy with this one. And we sort of like at one point it was a little still too Hydra. It was like, let's make it a little creepy, more insectile, but in the end, you can see it came out so good. And I presented this to you. This should, it's going to be a multi-headed Hydra-like insecty thing. It should be a different to fight than just bunches of hit points.
Right.
And you delivered. Again, let's kind of take a quick look. We're not going to show you the full details of this, but
you're just going to see the page that it's in.
This stat block takes up an entire page. Where's the camera?
There we go.
There we go. An entire page, and then a tiny bit on the other side. But that is a massive stat block. The biggest stat block Starfinder, I think, has ever had.
Ooh.
I think. I mean, maybe there's one in an Alien Archive that might be a touch longer, but this one is at least the longest Adventure Path stat block I have ever seen. So let's talk about how this thing works.
How do you even approach the thing?
Yeah. It's obviously the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that also probably Starfinder's ever fought. And that isn't a starship, right? It's the biggest size category possible.
Right.
And while they have also fought some big things previously in other adventures, this will be the biggest thing they fight that's not a starship.
One of the key, sort of in building this out, it's a Hydra-like thing. Mm-hmm. That already says a lot.
Yes.
Right? What that says is you fight this creature, like a Hydra, you fight this creature in a different way than you fight other creatures. Mm-hmm. It comes in with an overwhelming level of threat, which you mitigate by attacking its necks and cutting off its heads, and then what happens there and so on. That's part of the classic fighting the Hydra story. Yeah. This is why, going back to having some sort of pre-information to prep you for this, because this isn't. I was thinking, you don't fight it by itself, right? It's got all the other swarm creatures there. Right. But whenever you've got players going into an overwhelming fight like that, having them well positioned for it, so they feel like, okay, we can do the smart tactical. We know what the smart tactical thing to do is. We don't have to fumble around trying to figure out what the smart move is. Right, we know what the smart move is. Doing it is hard, but doing it has some definitive effects in making everything else sort of easy.
There's a sort of it's got in some ways a little bit of a video game boss fight thing, in that there are, like, everyone said, there are what are known as ads, right? And one of these a portal opens up nearby, and a Swarm Thresher Lord just comes out.
Yep.
At that point, Swarm Thresher Lord is not necessarily the toughest, but you don't want to have too many of them at one time. Also, while you're fighting this guy, they're going to be like, let's take care of that real quick, or ignore it for now because we just want to focus on the big guy.
Well, there's always going to be somebody, right? There's going to be some, the envoy, right?
Right, sure.
I'm helping everybody else out, but when it comes to dishing out the power myself, I can't. Oh, hey, there's a thing I can fight, right? So I see, having played an envoy all the way through Dead Suns, it's exactly the kind of thing of like, there's the big thing. Okay, soldier, operative, you got. I'm going to get this.
I'll get the little guys.
So there's not too many of them. We can't do.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, there's the exposition kind of lets you know that this thing is very Hydra-like, in the person. And Starfinder, you might not even know what a Hydra is because it's not a common thing. Right. So it should have mentioned, like, it's something like my story out of the story my mother told me, or something like that, where it's like, you got to cut off the heads and burn the necks, basically, because this thing regenerates damage to its body so
like
fast.
A stupidly fast amount.
Stupidly fast. It's kind of, if you just were to attack it normally, I don't think it would be possible to win this fight. You'd run out of ammunition before you got even close to fighting it. So you basically, again, got to go around chopping off heads, burning it, and each one of those, eventually you'll get it headless, and that's the end of the fight. But in the meantime, it's spitting resin on you to freeze you in place. It's calling forth. It's biting and chomping.
And it's got, because it's like Hydra Cleric, right? It's got the deific powers where it's got the ability to, like, just basically flip open any of the mythics or any of the mystic spells, and it just does whichever one of those it wants. Right?
It's got it's still got it's managed to get a tiny bit of this divine power enough to be scary,
right?
As a little bit of a spellcaster, yeah.
But then you also kind of push back from that as you gradually defeat the thing. Its ability to call upon sort of overwhelming amounts of mystic power becomes less and less.
Yeah. So you definitely feel like you're moving forward with the fight. It's not just maybe we'll eventually kill it. Oh yeah, we're definitely wearing it down, it down. And hopefully, I don't know. I'm pretty sure this is going to kill at least one player character. This,
Oh, I'd feel bad if it did.
and, I mean, it's your war story. Someone's going to have to make a noble sacrifice,
Yep.
and at some point, and be the
And
one
then they can be
that's taken out.
They'll be remembered well
Of
by
course,
everybody.
yeah,
right?
they'll get their
Because they're
Purple
the
Heart
hero,
posthumously or what have you.
It's
But
elementary
basically,
schools,
and that's the the final fight, and then once that has happened, the PCs can sort of take stock and get themselves back to back to base, and at that point, the rest of the swarm on the planet kind of gets a little discombobulated and disorganized, and they're eventually the SDF is able to sort of take back the planet completely. Yeah, that's the end, right?
That's right. Other than ribbon cutting and
Exactly.
getting elementary schools named after you and stuff like
right,
that.
becoming the big war heroes of Suscon, and maybe retiring, depending on what your PCs want to do.
But is it the end,
Oh,
Jason?
but is it the end? So, as we always do at Volume 6, we have a little bit of a continuing the campaign article that talks about what to do next if you really want to continue this stuff. In addition to a great article in the back here that's just got a massive new sort of vehicles of a military bent that are useful in the adventure, but also just if you're having any kind of military campaign by Anthony Bono. Check it out. Check that one out. But mostly, we want to talk a little bit more about sort of the continuing the campaign. There's two things that we always give sort of like lots of little plot hooks, and then two sort of big plot hooks with big stat blocks. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I have a piece of art that I really want to show. One of the pieces comes in that says, sort of this Sheeran Angel of Hylax comes in and says, we need to defeat the swarm once and for all. We need to take, Hylax has shown me a way to redeem them. And just as a piece of art by Alyssa McCarthy, and it's basically, I said, what if we gave a bug angel, just regular angel wings instead of insectile angel wings, right? And the flaming sword, and this force of nature is essentially comes to the PCs and says, I have a plan, but to sort of, again, spoilers, you find out slowly that this angel may not be in Hylax's good graces after all, because what he's doing is sort of forcing the swarm back into to be independent from the hive mind, which is something that is actually sort of against Hylax's tenets in a lot of ways. She's all about sort of self-determination. While she's about good, friendly bug people and diplomacy and whatnot, she also doesn't want to force people to not do something they don't want to do. So you find out that this particular angel, Shulith Hyla, is just kind of a jerk, right? And so you might have to fight this angel. So it becomes a thing about like going from fighting a different kind of one kind of divine thing to fighting a different kind of that maybe is technically good aligned, right?
Yeah, very different.
And whether or not it's sort of like, no, let's not deal with this person, deal with this angel and go off. You find out this angel's gonna find some other lackeys to do the thing, so it becomes a sort of like, do you have what do you do? Do you have to stop them or not? This bit, and then there's a whole extra bit about like, hey, if you really want to take the fight to the full swarm, hey, maybe there's a place you can go. A very heart of the swarm from Zerg from StarCraft kind of like thing where you find that there's this amalgam of different kind of swarm creatures. It also has a great piece of art, but I didn't bring it with me, so you might check it out. It's this gross purple thing that's got like bugs and pinchers, and the swarm brood soul basically to finish off the cool. Maybe that finishes off the swarm for good once and for all. If you want to in your campaign, we probably won't have that in the main canon.
We're not going to go through and tear all the swarm pages out of the other archives.
All of the continuing the campaign stuff was written by Tracy Barnett, who is has written actually a few of our continuing the campaign stuff for Starfinder the past few APs, and they've done an awesome job at that. So that's sort of this book in a big nutshell. There's some fun creatures at the end, new monsters, including like a Cortana from Halo that's gone evil, a really high level new species that is all based about magic and they hate technology.
Super mage,
CR18 super mage. What else we got in there?
Like an electricity kind of
elemental
thing.
Elemental thing that ends up in the adventure. Perhaps. Oh, and how could I forget? The mimetic Zenith, which is a Skittermander Zoe. I'll show that to you all.
Skittermander Zoe.
There's basically what happens if a meme comes to life and goes out into the world and does all sorts of things. And maybe you want to just sort of punch it in the face. So is that all those? I'm gonna have to make sure to remember everyone's name here, so to give everyone their props. Monsters in the Back of this were written by Violet Hargrave, yourself, Ron Lundy, James Allen Pierce, and Nate Wright. So again, I can't all the time. I get just blown away by the stuff that we get from our authors and freelancers, and I'm so pleased that I found some terrific people to help me create Starfinder and all the crazy adventures.
And put a big glorious capstone on this adventure.
Yes, so, yes, and but that that's just one of our many APs. If you've got any questions, let's start getting them into chat right now about this adventure, about the AP in general, about stuff that's in the back matter of the other volumes. Anything you want to ask Ron about writing all of Paizo's adventures?
Love everything.
Please, shoot us a question or two. In the meantime, Ron, how's it? I already asked you how's it going. So, soon, I don't know. We've got something coming up. We've got the Threefold Conspiracy coming up. After this one is an adventure written by me, so whatever.
All right.
And then there's some more of those, some more great adventures, and then after that, again, we only again stealthily announced what comes after Threefold Conspiracy, and that is Devastation Arc, our big sort of high level AP. So look for more information about that coming real soon, and which may or may not be appropriate to the people sitting here at this
very table.
So Laurie 7x3 is asking, Halo's a thing now in Starfinder. Sure, why not? Right? Are we talking about Halos on Angels, or are we talking about Halos from the video game Halo?
And either, I suppose.
I mean, you could have a big ring planet if you wanted to. That would be totally fun and awesome. A constructed ring planet. I'm sure we have one of those or something like that sort of bouncing around somewhere in our setting without stealing too much from Bungie.
Exactly.
Hey, Bungie, we love you. Thanks for being also in Seattle with us. But in terms of what I sort of mentioned, Cortana is this sort of virtual assistant gone bad. It's called the Virtual Phantom, and but it has I kind of was sort of like, I think I might have given the artist some Cortana pictures, but something like this, but Starfinder-y and green, instead of blue. But I don't think there's going to be a Master Chief. Well, we have our own, Space Marines of sorts. You can always throw on some heavy armor and be a Space Marine.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And I guess nobody'll stop you if you wanted to decide that one of the new Starship roles in the character operations manual, right? The Chief Mate, if you wanted to call the Master Chief.
The Master Chief Mate.
This is a great question, actually. If I wanted to write APs, how would I build my career in that direction? We get that a lot from the Starfinder side.
From the Starfinder side, this is from Hillary Moon Murphy, who's already contributed a lot to Starfinder in terms of many of our back matter articles and monsters and whatnot. For specifically for Hillary, it's a good start.
That's right.
Start writing for us. It's a great start to start writing APs. But in general, if you want to just get started freelancing for us author-wise, again, in a way, the thing to do it is to do it, and that is sort of look at third-party stuff. There's free stuff, like even though Wayfinder only comes out once a year now, but getting in on that, writing stuff just for yourself and putting it up on a blog shows us that you want to do the thing, right? Yep. And if you can give us sort of samples of what you've done, we can take a look at it and go like, oh yeah, your style is totally copacetic with our style. Yeah, come, maybe we can give you something here and there. And we get a lot of people who want to write for us. So in general, you're going to start probably small, right? One thing here and there, maybe a monster here and there, or a Codex of Worlds for Starfinder. And as we sort of move along and you sort of find out other projects that you work on, the longer stuff you write, and have proven yourself, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
You've hit your deadlines and whatnot. There's always a chance if you talk to someone that you've been getting other projects from and be like, I'm interested in writing an AP. We don't know you're interested in writing an AP until you tell us.
Right.
Right. And then we'll be like, oh yeah, you've done this, this, and this. Maybe it's about time we set you up. Maybe you want to start with a Starfinder Society scenario, which is also just as difficult. And it's not much. It's half as many words, but it's got a different style to it, right? So if you've done end up doing all that and you've contacted one of us and Ron here works on the Pathfinder APs,
Right,
so if you want to do Pathfinder stuff too, eventually you want to talk to us about it.
Yep,
And we'll see
absolutely.
what we can do. And we only have so many of those we can give out a year, but I'm always trying to get new voices and new names out there personally.
Yeah, and we've always been sort of if it seems like working up to that, it seems like we're being super selective. That I've learned is really by necessity. As the adventure path developers, so I do on the Pathfinder side, we're trying to get through so much content that having to somebody that is untested who gives us something we need to dramatically rework, it not just takes up so much of our time for that one adventure, but it can risk putting a whole adventure path sort of skewed off schedule and so it's that's why when we say, oh, do a lot of writing for us and that's how you get in, that's by necessity. We have to have people that we know are trusted and tested to get this done.
To continue with this sort of line of questioning from Hillary Moon Murphy, she's asking if is it required that we get a scenario to write an AP. It's not required. I don't think so. Some of the developers like definitely dip your toes in there. I think scenario writing can be as hard as writing an adventure. So I think if you can get in on either one of those, I'm sure if you've written a scenario, I know you can. That means I know you can write an adventure, right? And so I will, chat with the developer of that scenario and be like, is this person ready yet? What do you think? Because it is generally twice as many words as a scenario.
Yeah, twice 2.5. I'd actually say, I'd go so far as to say yes. Not necessarily Pathfinder Society or Starfinder Society scenario, but you have to write an adventure of some sort,
right? Yeah,
because they're very different. You can be, and there are plenty of people like this. When it comes to world building and inventiveness, they have the most spectacular ideas, but making the switch to being, I've got these great ideas I want to put on a page, to I have these great ideas that I want to reveal to the players in a narrative adventure type structure. Some people aren't as good as that. So showing that you can do that is important.
Even if it's something short, right, that again you put up on your own blog or something like that, right? If it's like a 5-6 page narrative structure that shows how adventures work and kind of matches our style in a lot of ways. That's a great way to sort of show that you can do it and show us that you can do it.
Exactly.
Let's move on. Joe Junkers wrote, for the capstone missions in an AP, what expectations do you work from so far as what you expect the random crew of PCs can accomplish? It's always a tricky thing with adventures, and all adventures, honestly, not just capstone APs. What do the PCs, can they do? All groups of PCs are different. What will they do? We kind of try to give advice about all sorts of things, but sometimes we don't know, right? And we can only just sort of hope for the best. That's why GMs are such an important, vital part to our adventures in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
We give you hopefully enough tools, GMs, to take your players to where they need to go, but GMs, sometimes you're just going to need to fill in those blanks. There's a sort of a liken this recently to our adventures are theme park rides. That while they are, can be, we have to go from point A to point B. So, railroad is a dirty word, but it is a little bit of but at least the journey should, even though where the end might be, the journey should be as interesting as the end. And, and that's just the way it is, because we have to write. We're telling a story, and we're telling a fairly specific story. That this is a war story, or a horror story, or a story about a traveling circus.
Dinosaurs and crazy stuff.
Dinosaurs and crazy stuff. So you that's something you need to know ahead of time when you're getting into it.
Absolutely, and I do think that there's a little bit of sort of the question Joe had specifically about capstone adventures. When I'm writing, I will treat a first level adventure differently than something like this, because for a first level adventure, the party hasn't necessarily gelled together yet, and it's not. You need to be a little softer on people who have got sort of all these disparate ideas who are coming together and might not kind of work together. By the time you get to adventure 6 of a 6-part adventure path, your party
You've been through
works well together, hopefully. Right? And it may be, we started out where we were, oh, look at us, we're 5 players and 4 of us are Android envoys, and how's that going to work out? Well, maybe by the time you get to this adventure, you've had some turnover in your characters, and then you've got a more standard set of, people that can dish out a lot of damage, versus people that can handle a lot of the skills and so on. So assuming that
definitely finding that the high level adventures that I'm currently working on, just sort of assuming that they can take a lot. I'm just really pushing the dial a little bit, you know, and just letting all my authors be like, yeah, go crazy.
Yeah, that's been the case for, you know, you get to these high level adventures and it's like, oh well, you know, something does you 2d6 points of damage, and nobody's gonna care, right? They get resistance higher than that, right?
Maybe,
but it feels high level to be like, oh, you're taking. GM scoops up the dice, you know,
So
8d6 damage,
sense,
and you're like, oh well, in the end with all my resistance, everything, that's not very much, but that makes me feel like a big hero, right?
True.
So.
Yeah. So that's a sort of thing. We do try to turn the dial a little bit up for Capstone Adventures, I think. Yeah. Laurie 7x3 is also asking about what the Hydra was always the idea, or did we discuss other monster versions of the God Host? I don't think I did with the. Normally, I work with Rob McCreary, and at the time, it was Chris Sims. I think when we were plotting this out. I don't know. I just picked Hydra and went with it, and no one said either way. So I just thought it was cool. I was like, I kind of wanted to have them have to chop off many heads. I don't know, just felt different and new and fun.
Certainly hadn't done it before in Starfinder.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just sort of like, yeah, we'll make a cool piece of art. A little bit of God Hydra, right? You know. So yeah, what happens? Just to get into some other behind the scenes is before we assign this stuff out, we actually write art briefs for the cover and the cover figure, the sort of cover scene and the cover figure, and those don't necessarily go out before the authors get the outlines. The authors get to see that, and they're like, oh look, okay, we know that this thing is going to be in it probably, and this scene should probably happen, right? So they have that idea that of something that needs to occur. But generally, these come in the cover. Oops. Sorry about that. The covers come in way before any of the other art does. So we get those first, we get those early, and we can get really excited about it. And it may have been you had only recently turned in the adventure, and we had gotten the art. It was something real close along. I was like, look at the thing that you're gonna get.
Like, now I'm inspired.
So this is sort of how we end up doing it, mainly because we want to make sure that these covers are just the front of the book, and you want to be able to judge this book by the cover,
by the cover upon it. This is the background here is riding like crazy, just helmet for leather, and then in the military vehicle. This is part of that chase that we talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
To make sure that
happens.
When we've got all these different missions that are going on the planet, make sure one of them is at least like this.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. If you really can zoom in on there too, Oba's eyes at the gunner, and she couldn't be happier about that. Her face is just a big old smile. It's pretty hilarious. I love it. Let's see. What advice would we have for game masters running this AP? Well, any advice for game masters here running at the end, Ron?
Specifically the end.
Yeah, the end here.
Yeah. Anytime you can telegraph a big conclusion satisfactorily, that's great. It's great for the players. It makes them feel immersed in the story. It makes them feel like they're sort of smart and can run. So definitely look over that full page plus stat block in order to know sort of what's coming at the end. If you need to adjust sort of, maybe sort of, treasure drop their equipment availability throughout to lean into that. I made sure that the different military leaders throughout kind of all have their own individual personalities. That was something that I tried hard to do. Yeah. And so I would say for this adventure in particular, learn those. You've got because when you get up near the area where the temple is, I mean, it's one thing to be, all right, well, okay, so there's a woman in charge here, and they're keeping an eye on things, to when actually, here's a woman who didn't want to be in this war in the first place and plans to just head out to her, wealthy chalet that's a few mountaintops over if possible, but she's developed kind of this attachment to her people, and so she's sort of this unwilling,
she took on it's
just
basically the suicide mission.
That's the kind of thing that you can build in. Yeah. Right? So knowing that kind of stuff when you go through helps sort of drive things a little more home for the heroes, makes them feel a little more invested in what they're doing, I think.
Indeed. Big NPCs like that, we a lot of times too, we try to seed some stuff so that they get like, oh, we know this person from way back. I know it's kind of really difficult to do that for an entire army. Which is why I sort of kept that Commander Njiri figure as the NPC's contact here and there, and the priest of Hylax that you rescue in the very first volume. He comes back here and there, and hopefully your players will also make sort of other sort of NPC friends along the way, and if they do, they can GMs, bring them back, because that's always more exciting to
Oh,
see
yeah.
that person come back and do something cool, or you need to rescue them again or something like that. That really makes it personal for the group.
We don't know. The best we can do is put a lot of options out there. It's sort of a buffet of interesting NPCs,
Yeah.
and then whoever the players engage with and want to run with, we make it so they can be people that you can run
Yeah, exactly. A couple more questions real quick. Dark Galaxies Gaming was asking, is there an organization tracker sheet to track those allocation choices and the event results? It's not. No, because it's not that complicated.
Yeah, maybe that sound more complicated than it is.
Yeah, but
okay.
it's just basically sort of like you'll need this and this. But the adventure does sort of say, when you get to that part, if you did this, remember this. So
Right.
or if they mess this up, this is going to affect this area. So you might need to take a couple little notes here and there, but I don't think it's as complicated as needing an entire tracking sheet. It's no circus management.
Right. Well, as an example of something that is
yeah, exactly. Another question from Lori 7x3. She's wondering why the stewards aren't taking care of the big problems. Isn't their job? They can't always be that busy when there's a galaxy-sized threat. I mean, a lot of times they are. But the thing about the Attack of the Swarm Adventure Path is the stewards are nowhere to be found. It's not their purview. It's not their jurisdiction.
Yep.
The stewards are not necessarily the universe's police. They're the Pact World's FBI police type, right? And it's basically, and that's the sort of thing we have to think about a lot. It's like, what can the PCs just go to the law enforcement, especially in Starfinder? Can they go to this group and have them solve the problems? Well, no, because X. No, because Y. You have to do it yourself, PCs, and hopefully you've built PCs that want to do that.
Right. It could be yes and as well, because there's steward sort of archetypes and things like that to be able to have people who have that kind of background
100%.
connection. Like, so people who really want to be, let's take it to the cops, and I'm the cops.
Yeah,
have exactly that kind of characters.
But I will tell you that the stewards take a much larger part in the Threefold Conspiracy, because that is a Pact Worlds centered AP, and it is a threat to the Pact Worlds. So you'll be seeing a lot of stewards. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. I'm going to read this out from Cosmic Creative, some good advice for GMs planning to run the AP. Read book 6 before you run book 1. Because we have the sort of call backs and call forwards between those two books, since they essentially take place in a lot of the same spaces. So, yes. And yeah, if you want to introduce this lady commander from at the end here, earlier on, maybe you see her in the war.
Great. Yeah.
That would be good too. So with that, I think we're gonna call it an hour, because we're out of time. Any final words you want to say there, Ron?
No, this was a ton of fun. It was exciting for me to be tackling sort of this real high level stuff, and man, if only I can be on hand for even higher level stuff. So
I mean, it's just a pipe dream for now. I'm sure you'll be around for some time.
I'm always available.
That's the thing about Ron Lundeen. He's always available.
Yep.
So from myself and Ron and Peyton over there in the booth, have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.